Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. We talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm Roach Jeffrey, and subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another video. The transfer portal is rolling in college basketball right now. So many players are deciding to hit the portal and find new teams, but none more than the North Carolina Tar Heels, who are going through a complete roster flux right now. There are so many players that are in the portal, returning to North Carolina, and now the Tar Heels are starting to bring in transfers of their own. But I'm going to go over everything that has to do with the North Carolina roster and see whether I think it's going to help or hurt the Tar Heels for next season. Now, Caleb Love is the big story right now for the North Carolina Tar Heels because Caleb Love has decided to enter the transfer portal. Now, a lot of people are a bit mixed on this. I would say more people are probably leaning toward the side of the fact that Caleb Love leaving North Carolina is a good thing because he was a big reason why North Carolina struggled this past season. He took bad shots. He never was in the flow of the offense of what Hubert Davis wanted the Tar Heels to do. Caleb Love was chunking up threes. He wasn't within the offense, passing the ball to Armando Bacot, and then finding a way to get shots off Armando Bacot, or just taking better shots overall. We know Caleb Love's a talented player. He still hit the big shot against Duke to end Coach K's career in the Final Four. That will still live on in North Carolina fans' memories forever, and it still will give Caleb Love that big lasting moment in a North Carolina jersey. And even though he will be going on to another team, and I think he can help a new team wherever he decides to transfer to, and maybe still potentially have an NBA career. But I do think at the end of the day, Caleb Love leaving North Carolina is a good thing because North Carolina does need a reset of the roster and to actually bring in players that will follow what Hubert Davis wants his team to do. Now, the other big news for North Carolina right now, besides the fact that Caleb Love is entering the transfer portal, is that North Carolina's brought in guard transfer from Brown University, Paxson Wojcik. I think that's a huge addition for North Carolina because he does have connections to the North Carolina program, and also the fact that Paxson Wojcik was a really solid guard at Brown University. He averaged 14.9 points per game. He's a really solid player, and a lot of other teams were looking at him in the transfer portal. Will he be able to replace Caleb Love right off the bat? There's no way, because Caleb Love averaged 16.9 points per game. As flawed as he still was North Carolina's leading scorer. And Paxton Wojcik, he's a really solid player, but he only averaged 14.9 points per game at a smaller school like Brown University. So is he a complete fix for Caleb Love's departure? No, but he definitely will help North Carolina out at the guard position. He might play more team basketball, knowing that he is going up to a bigger school, and he might be able to share the basketball better from the guard position and be able to share the spotlight with some of North Carolina's other players instead of trying to be the lead guy like Caleb Love tried to do this past season. Now, obviously, North Carolina has a lot of other roster moves as well. Puff Johnson's in the transfer portal. I think that's a tough loss as well, but Puff Johnson was very injury-prone, and he had a tough time getting things going at North Carolina. He did improve in some areas the past couple years, but he still had his spotlight in the national championship game against Kansas. He had a lot of success in that game. Probably the best performance that Puff Johnson had in North Carolina uniform, but losing him to the portal I don't think is a super big loss for North Carolina. I think they'll be able to bring in some transfer portal players in to be able to replace Puff Johnson. And all the other players North Carolina is losing: Tyler Nichols in the transfer portal, Justin McCoy, Dontrez Style, and Will Shaver. Most of those players are not too significant. I think losing Tyler Nichols and Dontrez Styles are a bit tough because they were depth pieces at the guard positions, and they were relatively young, so I think that could have helped North Carolina out in the future if they had to develop. But Seth Trimble's still at North Carolina, and DeMarco Dunn, so those are two key rotational pieces still there at North Carolina right now, unless they decide to enter the transfer portal. But the other big news for North Carolina is that Armando Bacot and R.J. Davis are returning to the Tar Heels, and I think that's huge because R.J. Davis did a much better job than Caleb Love this past season of sharing the basketball, getting the ball to Armando Bacot, kicking the ball out to Leaky Black and Pete Nance for open threes. I think R.J. Davis did a much better job. He's a good free throw shooter, and sometimes he does take bad shots as well, but I do think Hubert Davis will be able to control R.J. Davis a bit better and be able to tell him not to take bad shots, unlike what Caleb Love was doing this past season. And Armando Bacot, he's a really good center. And a big reason why he's returning, as well as R.J. Davis, is they're probably not going to get drafted right now. They do need to improve, and I think they have the potential to eventually get drafted, or they might not get drafted and eventually play in the NBA as an undrafted free agent. But Armando Bacot's still a really solid center, and it's tough to be able to find good centers in the transfer portal. It's a lot easier to find guards and forwards. You can get a good center every now and then, but I do think it's really key for North Carolina to return Armando Bacot because he's still one of the best centers in college basketball, and you're not going to have to find a new center to be able to replace him. And as long long as Armando Bacot's healthier next season, I think that his return, coupled with the fact that R.J. Davis is back at point guard, I think will really help out the Tar Heels next season. But North Carolina is also losing Pete Nance and Leaky Black to graduation. Those are really tough losses, but it is what it is. They're having to graduate, and there's nothing you can do about it. But looking at North Carolina's roster right now, will the Tar Heels have a better roster next season than the roster they had this past season overall? Now, I do think it's a bit too early to tell at this point because North Carolina has a lot more work to do in the transfer portal. But looking at North Carolina's track record in the portal, they are a blue blood. They're one of the top programs in college basketball. And they're going after some of the biggest names in the portal. They're going after Nick Timberlake from Towson. They're going after a lot of really good players in the portal as we speak, and I really think that's going to help out the Tar Heels. So at the end of the day, it is way too early to tell. I do think that the North Carolina Tar Heels will be able to replace Caleb Love's production and potentially get players that will be better suited for Hubert Davis's offense, share the basketball more, and have a much better team. Now, obviously, if the Tar Heels aren't able to bring in great players through the portal, then Caleb Love's loss will be huge, and North Carolina could have a really bad season next year, and they won't improve at all, and they'll still be a middling team in the ACC, and they might squeak into the tournament or miss the tournament, be in the NIT, unless they decide to not play in the NIT next year as well. But I do think overall North Carolina's too good of a basketball team. They have a great NIL operation. Hubert Davis, he has the potential to be able to bring in really good players. He already has two really good recruits coming in Simeon Wilcher, a 4-star guard, and a 4-star forward in Zayden High as well. So they have two really good high school recruits coming in that should be able to factor into the rotation. You're bringing back two of your best starters in Armando Bacot and R.J. Davis, and even though you're losing a lot to the transfer portal, the only one that really hurts is Caleb Love. Puff Johnson a little bit, but for the most part, it is Caleb Love. And you're bringing in Paxson Wojcik right now from Brown University, which is a really good transfer addition. And I think if North Carolina can bring in 3 or 4 more transfer portal players that are really solid, and they'll be able to replace Caleb Love's production, then I do think that North Carolina will be a better basketball team next year than if they were bringing back Caleb Love and not bringing in new transfer guards, because then North Carolina would have the same result next year. They might make the tournament, but the way Caleb Love played on offense did not benefit Hubert Davis' style of play, the way he wants his Tar Heel team to run offense. And on the defensive side as well, I think Caleb Love was solid at times on defense, but overall, I think that Hubert Davis can do a better job in the portal as well to be able to bring in a plethora of guys that will be able to play really good defense and share the basketball more. You look at some of these teams in college basketball right now that are having a lot of success in March Madness, they have deep basketball teams. San Diego State has 6 guys that are averaging between 7 and 9 points. You've got a really deep team in UConn and Miami as well. They have 8 or 9 players that are really good rotational players. I think North Carolina will be built for success next season if your star players are Armando Bacot and R.J. Davis, and you also have 2 really good freshmen coming in, if one of them really performs well, and maybe one of the players from last season that were a freshman, Seth Trimble and Jalen Washington, improves, and I think if the Tar Heels are able to bring in 3 or 4 really good transfer portal players to average, potentially what I think Paxson Wojcik will average around 8 points per game, if they have 3 or 4 more guys that are averaging between 7 and 10 points per game, and they can model their offense kind of like UConn or San Diego State does, where not one player has the ball in his hands the most and is trying to score a lot like Caleb Love, then I do think North Carolina's roster will be better next season because they'll have a plethora of guys that are really good at sharing the basketball, that are all able to get a bucket when they need to, and if one guy's not playing well, then the others can step up instead of it being mostly on Caleb Love and R.J. Davis' shoulders. And I think North Carolina will have a better team next year, but they're going to have to bring in some really good portal players to put together a good offense to be able to share the basketball, because if not, then Caleb Love's loss will be huge, and they won't have enough firepower on the offensive end to be able to win games in the ACC next season. But if North Carolina is able to bring in 3 or 4 more transfer portal players to average between 7 and 10 points per game, to be able to replace Caleb Love's production and do a better job of sharing the basketball, and all be able to score the basketball in a variety of ways with a lot of different players, then I do think that North Carolina will have a better roster next season. But Hubert Davis will have to do a better job assembling this roster and getting North Carolina to play at a high level. But these roster moves by the Tar Heels are definitely starting to trend in the right direction, that North Carolina will be a better basketball team next season. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Comment down below what you think about Caleb Love entering the transfer portal, and whether you think North Carolina will be able to replace his production, and if you think the Tar Heels will be a better basketball team without Caleb Love next season if they bring in good transfer portal players. Follow me on Twitter as well, and I will see you next time.